We're living in a very divisive world. We can see that in so many areas, whether it's politics or wars and all of that. Newfield arose, and the genesis, it came from seeing the pain and the intensity that can arise in life. And so Newfield's mission is really a response to that, a vision for a better world where separation is not one of the primary components. And Newfield is really about amplifying human goodness. So amidst the chaos, amidst the meta crisis that we face, not just human divisiveness, but all of the crises that we're encountering in life, is really a way, how do we begin to address these breakdowns, these very big collective elements that we're facing, by coming into contact with our deeper goodness and learning how to navigate from there. So one of the things that Newfield does is look at human communication. Yeah, how do we harness the power of generative language and utilize that to navigate breakdowns and crisis in a better way? The other piece is listening. How do we begin to calibrate our listening and attune to each other? And how do we bring in emotional responsibility, emotional agility, and literacy? And then also even bringing in multiple forms of intelligence. How do we utilize the body and soma to impact how we live life, and coming into this sense of a true shared humanity? So one of the fundamental questions that Newfield looks at is, how are we showing up? Yeah, when we encounter friction or obstacles or challenges, how do we show up in the face of that? So given that life brings us repetitive challenges over and over again, how do we be? How do we be in a way that serves? So when we look at this meta model, one facet is that we look at the observer. Yeah, we look at how we look. And our observer, the way in which we observe life, is not just abstract, but it's embodied, historical, right? It has to do with our culture, with our background, our age, our gender, our ethnicity, the experiences we haven't had and we have had. It's that coming together of all of those facets of being alive that shapes and influences the observer we are, how we see the world, how we frame life. And this observer, based on our epistemic lens, the way we see, this observer takes actions, yeah? It has practices. We have certain ways of engaging and participating in life itself. And we have certain ways in which we do not, yeah? So the observer and the actions we take are together, are linked. And based on these actions, based on these practices and ways of engaging, we generate results. We have outcomes. So when we look at it all together, we call it the OR model. We notice we are an observer based on that confluence of factors, and we take actions, and then we generate results. And so what we can see is that depending on how we observe, life shows up differently. And this is at the heart of what we examine at Newfield. Our tendency when we don't like our results, when we don't like the actions, our tendency is to look at what is the action we're taking. And at Newfield, we do look at action, but we also augment that by taking a look at how we look. So what we see is that if we really notice how we notice, observe how we observe, and see how we see over time, that evolves, it's dynamic and changes. Yeah, so if I'm 3, I see the world a certain way. At 15, I see the world a very different way. At 47, 67, 97. Yeah, so my observer is not one thing. It is evolving with time. So then we can ask the question, well, how does this OR model connect to compassion? Yeah. Well, one piece is to recognize that if we are perpetually seeing the world differently over time and in different contexts, that also other people see the world differently than we see the world. And even though we often cognitively know this, we act in the world in a very different way, right? I'm right, they're wrong. Yeah, tends to be the way that we orient to different perspectives, different from ours. So one of the invitations of the OR model then is to say, yes, there are multiple perspectives. And not just multiple beliefs or stances in life, but multiple observers, how we actually relate to life itself. And this capacity to begin to take perspectives, to take different perspectives in life, begins to amplify what becomes possible in life. So not only are there multiple perspectives, but these perspectives are legitimate. Yeah, they come from particular historical narratives. They come from particular traditions. They come from particular experiences. If we orient to another human from a sense of inquiry and curiosity, what is available for me to expand my perspective? Yeah. So we begin to ask different questions. We begin to be able to take different actions in life. And we begin to listen to each other in a new way. We can begin to adjust and attune our listening to one another. So empathy, yeah, all of that sets the ground for empathy. We can cognitively understand that someone may have different experiences and history, and all of that is shining through them like a prism. And then we can also sense, what is it like to have that experience coursing through the being that I am? How do we resonate emotionally? And we sense into their pain, their suffering, their joy, their bliss, the whole range of emotions that is available to us. So when we're empathetic, we not only have a cognitive understanding, but we also have this limbic resonance, this emotional resonance, where we can attune to the experience of being alive, standing in someone's shoes. Yeah, effective empathy.
Now, very often, when we use the word compassion, it's often used as a synonym with kindness or being nice. I need to be more compassionate towards myself, we say. Or I need to try to be more compassionate to my neighbor. Often that either means sympathy or kindness. It can even mean pity by mistake. And what I'd love to invite is that compassion is not an emotion, but it's a practice. It's a process. That compassion builds on our ability to resonate with another person, which is empathy. When you're experiencing something, say sadness, I start experiencing sadness too inside of myself. Now, compassion takes this one step further. And it says, I'm now going to embrace these sensations that you're experiencing, but I'm experiencing them in my own being. Compassion says, I'm going to hold these sensations of pain, suffering, whatever, as if they were my own. I'm going to wrap them in love until a transmutation takes place, until the actual nature of the suffering changes and becomes something else. So to me, this is true compassion. We can use compassion to mean sympathetic or nice or kind, and we do use it that way. But to me, the sort of deeper essence of compassion is a process through which we are with suffering in a very specific way that allows suffering to become liberated. And immediately as that happens, there's an experience of closeness, an experience of deeper intimacy. And I use the word intimacy in the broad sense. being closer in connection with.
When we look at the power of compassion, that we have this capacity within ourselves, I think one of the pieces that's so important to remember is that in modernity, in this time in history, that the narrative of human beings as being separate is so dominant, it's so pervasive. And one of the reasons I believe that compassion in this way, this conscious compassion, is so powerful is because it does begin to dissipate that sense of separation. We see that we live in a time of loneliness, right? The epidemic of loneliness that we're in. And so as we practice compassion, there is also an awakening to the wovenness, the togetherness in which we live. And to me, that sense, that crossing over that bridge from a lonely world, a lonely existence, into a place where we can actually be with each other and honor each other, care for each other, dwell with each other, creates new ways of being in life, a new life experience. And whether that's being employed and utilized in an organization, whether that's within your family dynamic, whether that's in your community space, there is a way in which it enlivens life itself, and the immediacy of life becomes available to us.